Hello everyone, this is Jeff with Walk and Talk with Warden Jeff. Thank you for joining me on my walk this morning. I got a story that I want to tell you about inmate family picnics and visitation at a high medium security prison. That's right, you heard it correctly. Our prison was opened basically by minimum security people. Great people, but they had the minimum security mentality. We had a psychologist or psychiatrist or whatever you want to call her who had a lot of say about what happened in this facility. She thought it was a great idea when we first had opened that we needed to have a family picnic for the inmates so they could be able to communicate and have contact with their families. Well, the warden, being minimum security, thought, yeah, it was a great idea. These guys in these high medium security prisons are not the best of the best. They're not in prison because they missed Sunday school. They're not in prison for any, there are some minor offenses that are in there, but for the majority in a high medium security prison, there's some of your bad people. Anyway, we organized this picnic. I was a sergeant at the time, and my job was to make sure that everybody's visitation logs were up to date and all that, to make sure that we had a nice crowd, because the psychologist wanted a nice crowd, she said, for the inmate picnic. So we had this picnic, and at the picnic there was even some activities. There was games for the kids. It was in the fall, and all of the visitors got a state blanket to take with them to the yard in case if they got chilly. Well, you've got an inmate that's been locked up for 5 or 6 years. His wife is with him, or girlfriend, and they've got a blanket and an entire yard. They had the picnic out in our yard, which was huge, probably a 5 acre yard. We had staff, a lot of staff, but not adequate staff. And our instructions as the staff members were, don't crowd them. In other words, don't be in their business. Let them go ahead and visit and do whatever they're going to do. Well, like I said before, a guy's been locked up 6 or 7 years. His wife or girlfriend is there, and they got a blanket and a big yard, and the staff isn't bothering him. So what do you think was happening? Yeah, let your imagination run wild. So anyway, this picnic goes on, and there was activities for the kids. It looked just like a fair out there with a bunch of inmates. Of course, they were taking advantage of everything they could take advantage of. More drugs came in that day, estimated more drugs came in that day than we've ever had. There was an owl, an inmate dressed up like an owl. They had rented this outfit of an owl outfit. And this inmate was running around dressed like an owl, talking to all the little kids, telling the kids, don't do drugs. Hooty hoo, don't do drugs. Hooty hoo, don't do drugs. It was hilarious. What the owl was doing, later on we found out in the internal affairs investigation, which you'll find out why there was internal affairs investigation here in a minute. During the internal affairs investigation, found out that Hooty Hoo the owl was running around and transporting drugs from family to family, and transporting money that family had snuck in from inmate to inmate. The gangs were all involved in this big caper of making money on the yard. It was a huge opportunity for, let's just call it mischief, for the inmates. So anyway, the Hooty Hoo owl was running around putting drugs in people's blankets and money and all whatever takes place on a big drug deal there when you're a banger. So the picnic went on and went on and went on for hours. I think it was like a 5-hour picnic. They had a cookout for them, the whole bit. It was a scene. It was a real scene. The officers and lieutenants and captains, they hated every minute of it, but you know what, you got to do what the warden says, and that's just the way it was. So anyway, we finally got everybody off the yard, got the inmates put away, got all the staff members out, and got a call for a code down in the unit. Well, it was the same unit that the Hooty Hoo owl lived in. We went down there. I was a sergeant. I went with a lieutenant and a captain because there there was a lot of chatter on the radio, and it sounded like it was pretty serious. So we ran down to the cell house. There was Hootie Hoo Owl, passed out on the floor, still in his owl costume. His arm was exposed. Sticking in his arm was a needle that later on they found out was full of heroin. Hootie Hoo Owl had OD'd on heroin. You know, the owl that was running around telling the kids not to do drugs. So they got him up, got him transported to an outside hospital. He almost passed away. So as the investigation went a little farther, they found out that, you know, what I was telling you earlier, that the Hootie Hoo Owl was doing all the transporting with the drugs and the money and all that stuff. So anyway, that would be, in normal people's eyes, you would think that was time to end it, you know. You wouldn't have any more of these picnics. Not the case. It was such a success, according to the psychiatrist and the warden. The success was so great that we were going to have another picnic in the spring and maybe have 2 a year. And I thought, oh my goodness, I said, I hope somebody steps in and stops this mess. But they didn't. And we had 1 or 2 picnics a year for about 4 or 5 years until finally somebody come in that had security background and said, there is absolutely no way that we were having picnics for these guys and bringing all these drugs in and doing whatever these people are doing out there on the yard. Well, it was kind of funny. A few of us were standing there on the sidewalks when the visitors were being brought in for the second or third picnic. And you would be surprised, well, maybe you wouldn't be surprised, a year later, of all the women carrying in 2 and 3 month old babies. You know, their man had been locked up for 6 or 7 years, but they all had 2 or 3 year old babies. I don't know how that happened, really. I guess it was just a fluke. But anyway, that was a story of a high medium security facility being opened by a minimum security guy, and with a psychiatrist who basically ran the institution. That was good for the inmates, not so good for the staff, because we rounded up drugs for months after those picnics. A lot of ODs, had a lot of people running around stoned and smoked and everything else. But anyway, those days are over and long behind us. I don't think they do inmate picnics anymore. If they do, everybody pray for the officers, because it is a mess. I hope you enjoyed my story today. If you would, go on my channel, like and subscribe, and comment if you want to.